Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. This is not the first time that we approach Ecuadorian literature in this channel. A little over a year ago I told you about Huasipungo or The Villagers by Jorge Icaza, and before that, a long time ago, I did a video on 4 novellas of the Latin American avant-garde, and I shared with you briefly some ideas on Débora by Paulo Palacio. Now, a few months ago, my friend Kurt recommended to me a novel that I will admit I had not even heard of. Siete Lunas y Siete Serpientes by Demetrio Aguilera-Malta. My friend, I absolutely loved this novel. It would definitely make my top 10 list of the best Latin American novels that I have ever read. So please, get comfortable, okay? Because we need to talk about this book. The first thing I want to do, let me read you a description from the cover of the English translation of this novel, which, by the way, is by Gregory Rabassa. You know, 100 Years of Solitude, Hopscotch, so we're talking about that level of a translation. So it says right here below the title, and this was added to the English edition, it's not there in the original, a mythical tale of greed and corruption. And below that we get a book review or a snippet from it from the Houston Chronicle. And it says, a delightful, magical book whose wizardry calls to mind the fantastic happenings of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. It gives you an idea, you know, I think it's adequate, but one thing you have to keep in mind is that at one point at least, outside of Latin America, there were basically 2 things that they would say about Latin American authors. One of them, he or she was like Garcia Marquez. The other one, he or she was not like Garcia Marquez. So, as I said before, you know, this is one thing that you want to take with a grain of salt, but I think it gives you an idea what to expect. So, Siete Lunas y Siete Serpientes, which in English is known as 7 Serpents and 7 Moons, so they have actually inverted the title right there, according to Gregory Rabassa, because it flowed better. And actually, if you speak both languages, there's a reason, I can't tell you why in Spanish it has to be Siete Lunas y Siete Serpientes, and in English it has to be 7 Serpents and 7 Moons. It just doesn't sound proper, you know, if you do it the other way around, for some weird linguistic reason that I don't really know about. This novel was first published in the year 1970, and the author, Demetrio Aguilera-Malta, spent 20 years working on this novel, gathering materials, you know, thinking about the story, and this actually shows when you read the text. By the way, he wrote it in Mexico because he lived there at the time, and then later on he went on to serve as ambassador of Ecuador in Mexico, but that was 9 years after the publication of the novel. One of the things that I really like about this novel is the structure. So let me tell you a little bit about that. It is not a tremendously long novel, as you can tell right here. This is a Cátedra edition, so about 70 pages right here are just preliminary material. You also have notes. So the novel itself is just about 340 pages in length, and if you look at the English edition, it is 305 pages long. And the story is divided into 33 chapters. I don't know if the author did that on purpose, but I just want to let you know that in Spanish, the number 33 is known as La Edad de Cristo, or the Age of Christ. Just something there to keep in mind if you do decide to read this novel. The structure is just beautiful. It's delightful to read. It's just a pleasure to read, because you have the fates of several characters that are intricately interwoven, and you can see how their paths cross and how they affect or they shape each other's destinies. That is the kind of approach that you get here with the storytelling. And at some points you're going to notice that maybe a little mystery or something that is not clear arises, and you're going to wonder what happened to this character. Well, later on you're going to find out what happened to that character from the narrative thread of another character, so from the perspective of another character. And it's just, you can tell because of that it's just really well thought out, this whole novel. And once again, the guy spent 20 years thinking about it, so the narrative unfolds just in a beautiful way. So to approach the story itself, I thought we might do that by talking about the characters and their situations instead of just talking about a plot. You know, I think that way we can get a better idea of how this novel works. So in the very first chapter, we are introduced to a family. We have a brujo, or shaman. His name is Bulu Bulu, his wife Ña Crisanta, and they have a daughter named Dominga. Dominga has a problem. This is how the novel starts. Okay, she has a problem because she is under some sort of spell. Tiene la luna, she's with the moon. That's the way that they put it. Basically, what that means is that she is at the plenitude of her sexual life. And for example, the second thing that happens in the novel is that at night she is visited by two tintines. A tintin is kind of like a little goblin. And I mean, it gets really, really, really interesting, that part. So read the first pages and you'll see what I mean when these two tintines approach this woman who is just at the plenitude of her sexual life. Next, we meet the priest. We meet Padre Cándido. So we have a very interesting contrast right there. First you meet the shaman, then you meet the priest. It's a culture where these things are, they coexist, you know, they're existing there at the same time. And Padre Cándido, get a load of this, has a large image of Christ with whom he can have conversations. And this happens throughout the novel. So yes, one of the characters in this novel is Jesus himself. Now, if Jesus is a character, guess who else is going to be a character here too? Of course, the devil. Okay, but they don't call him the devil because you don't want to call the devil by his name. They call him El que sabemos, for example, you know who, or El coludo, the long-tailed one, or something like that. Very colorful characters, as you can tell. So the devil is very closely tied to two characters in this novel. The first one is Colonel Candelario Mariscal. Some people say he is the devil's son. Other people say he is the priest's, Padre Candelario's son. But at any rate, he is Padre Candelario's godson. So there's a connection, a very close connection between the two of them. And the colonel represents basically the masculinity. Okay, he is the incarnation of brute force. He is impulsive. He is the macho man. Now, the other character that the devil is closely connected to is, to me, you know, in my opinion, the true antagonist of this novel, and that is Crisostomo Chalena. He is a guy who makes a pact with the devil, and he comes to have control of the town's water supply because of that pact that he made with the devil. The wells run dry at one point, and he has these zinc roofs, you know, roofing kind of thing, and he gathers the water there, and then he asks the people in the town to pay for that water. If they don't have money, they pay in other ways, you know. So he is really the true antagonist of the town. He controls the lives of these people. And by the way, just to let you know, the name of the town here is Santoronton. Okay, so that is the setting. This is where the novel takes place. There are many characters in this novel, but let me mention just a few more that I think are really, really important to the story. We have a family, the Quindales, okay, and they are important because they have two daughters, Chepa and Clotilde. Chepa, the colonel wants to marry her, but things get a little bit complicated. That's all that I'm going to say, because I don't want to ruin the experience for you. And then on the other hand, Clotilde, she is a character who has a very personal view of things. This is something else that I want to leave a little bit vague. Sometimes you hear something, but you have to keep in mind that you're hearing things from her perspective. It may not be entirely the way that things actually happened. And the novel tells you about this as you continue to read. Now, at one point, she gets lost, and she ends up in the care of a doctor by the name of Juvencio Balda. He is a very important, crucial character also. And then I just want to mention one more, and that is another priest. This guy is named Padre Gaudencio. And what he wants to do is he wants to rebuild, or actually build a new church, because from his perspective, Padre Cándido, the other priest, is not really handling things properly in this town. So there, through the characters, you have an idea of what the story is like, and all of these are narrative threads, once again, that are interlaced in just an amazing way. Now, one of the things that I really liked, one of the most important things I think about this novel, is the style. This is where I felt that there was something new, something different going on. The language is just beautiful, and it's elaborate in the choice of words, but this is not your typical Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Alejo Carpentier Latin American Baroque, okay? One thing that Aguilera-Malta does, and he does it very well, is to make frequent use of very brief sentences, sometimes one-word sentences. It's what in Spanish we call oraciones unimembres. That's kind of like saying phrase or nominal sentence or something like that in English. It's a sentence basically where you don't have a verb, for example. So let me give you an example of that And I would like to approach that by reading you the first part of chapter 23, where you can get an idea of this at least. So I'm going to read it to you in Spanish, and I'll give you the translation by me, basically, in the screen, so that you can tell what is being said right here. But you can also get an idea of how it sounds. Tendido allí, herido allí, sufriendo allí, mirándola, los ojos grandes, muy grandes, todo vuelto ojos, febriles, asombrados, siguiéndola miradas de lazo, envolviéndola, atrayéndola, pupilas murallas, pupilas cadenas. ¿Dónde ir? ¿Dónde escaparse? ¿Dónde buscar refugio? Atada, de pies y manos, de alma, atada a unos ojos, en el suelo, en el aire, en él, atada. Clotilde, Clotilde, ¿le hablaba? Sin palabras, sin mover los labios, con los ojos, atada, con miedo, con recelo, con angustia. So that gives you an idea of how this whole thing sounds. And what I was reminded of as I read that was the style that is often used by Miguel Ángel Asturias, especially in El Señor Presidente, but also throughout his work. And actually, when he gave his lecture, when he won the Nobel Prize in Literature, he used that same style. And it's just, at first you may find it a little bit shocking, you may find it a little bit choppy, but it's actually very, very effective. It's poetic, and it's also quite varied. I do want to let you know that it's not like the whole novel is written like that. Very few authors would be able to do something like that. This sounds almost sometimes like something that Beckett could have written, because Beckett would use sentences like that, especially in his trilogy. But what we have here in Siete Lunas y Siete Serpientes is more like an alternation of that type of style and another style that is a little bit more Baroque. And regarding the style, let me just mention two more things very quickly. One of them, nautical terms. Okay, it's obvious that Demetrio Aguilera-Malta was familiar with nautical terms, and you can tell because he uses them throughout his novel. You can tell that they are very precise. Sometimes I need to look them up because I am not familiar with that. And the other one is words in the Quichua language. So that's another thing, another connection maybe with Miguel Ángel Asturias, because you find them throughout the text. In some places, by the way, of Latin America, we say Quechua. In Ecuador, they say Quichua, and in other places of Latin America too. So I also found out that a word that I have shared with you before, chapa, you know, that extra, little added extra, that is actually a Quichua word. So that was news to me, and I was like, wow, look at that. You know, I had just used that word recently, and I learned that thanks to this novel also. There are many themes, as you can imagine, but we're going to touch upon three of them, as we usually do. The first one, life in small-town Latin America. Okay, Gabriel Garcia Marquez has his Macondo, Juan Rulfo has his Comala. This is San Toronton, okay, and it's the town, the place is a character in itself. The characters here are types, so they are easy to recognize. There's one of these in every little town in Latin America, and thanks to that, Demetrio Aguilera-Malta is able to transcend Ecuador. This goes beyond Ecuador. It's about Latin America, but at the same time, because of the setting, you know, the words that are used, etc., this is also truly local. So that is another thing that I think is wonderful, how the novel manages to be both local and universal and to transcend also. Second theme, the eternal battle between good and evil. This is probably the main theme of the novel. We have a town here that is at the mercy of a caudillo, so just like Pedro Páramo, it's the same situation, basically a man, a strong man, quote unquote, who controls everything. But we also have in this case the forces of good, represented by Padre Cándido. Okay, so you have that struggle right there. By the way, Padre Cándido is the good priest, Padre Gaudencio is the bad priest. So Padre Cándido is the priest who cares about the people, who cares about his flock. On the other hand, you have Padre Gaudencio, who cares more about appearances, about maybe allying himself with power, you know. So you have there maybe two approaches that we have seen to religion in Latin America. And that's another thing that the novel does portray very well. And the third theme, I would say, is human weakness and resilience, both of them, okay? Because you're going to see in this novel people acting in silly ways, people being petty, but you're also going to see people who are willing to fight for justice and willing to fight oppression, even if that means that they are going to have to sacrifice themselves. Now we come to the central question here, or maybe something that you may be curious about. Is this novel an example of magical realism? That is the question that we have to ask, okay? And I think in this case, I have to say yes. This is a novel in which you have characters, human characters, turning into animals. Okay, so you have that whole Nahualismo thing going on at moments. There is at least one ghost that is present in the story. I'll let you find that out for yourself. Consider also the characters interacting, talking to Jesus and to the devil, right? So that could be an example of magical realism right there. There's one point in which a wounded man is brought back home by a group of monkeys who then act almost like human beings. And then later on, you have a scene in which virtually all the animals in the jungle are helping humans to build a ciénaga, which is kind of like a wetland system to hold water. So, I mean, all of these are really examples and moments in the novel that you could say, wow, yeah, this is an example of magical realism. Now, it is not exactly the magical realism that you're going to find in Garcia Marquez. I would describe the kind of magical realism that you find in Siete Lunas y Siete Serpientes as maybe less extravagant, but I would say also more obviously symbolic than the kind of thing, more artistic maybe, than you will find in Garcia Marquez. For example, the whole thing with the pact with the devil. You know, you can ask yourself, is it true? Did this guy really make a pact with the devil? Is he actually conversing with the devil? Or is this something that is describing maybe in allegorical terms? Something that you could see, you know, when somebody gets away with things, you know, when somebody's like really crafty, and you can think it's almost as if this person had made a pact with the devil. So it's that kind of thing. That's what I mean by both, you know, less extravagant and also more obviously symbolic right there. So what this does is to point to a different way of seeing the world. Maybe if you look at the indigenous peoples, you know, and the way that they were connected to nature, their more spiritual perspective than maybe somebody who is from a city, you know, in 20th century Quito, you know, or Guayaquil or any other city in Ecuador. So if I had to describe the kind of magical realism that you find right here, I would say it's kind of like a midway between magical realism of Garcia Marquez and marvelous real of Alejo Carpentier, which is a little bit more subtle. You know, this is kind of like between those two. But as you know, sometimes, you know, the real thing, like truth, is stranger than fiction. Because, for example, when I read about that whole thing with the animals helping people to build this wetland, just today, this morning, I was on Facebook and I found this post of something that happened in the Czech Republic. And I was like, you see, there's a connection right there. These things are magical realism because sometimes weird things happen. Listen to this story right here. For 7 years, officials were stuck in red tape trying to build a 1.2 million dam to restore a wetland. While they waited on permits, a family of beavers moved in and did the project for free. I was like, that is exactly like something that could have happened in a Latin American novel, you know, especially in Latin America. I am surprised that this did not happen in a Latin American country. But you see what I mean? You know, you have that connection to reality right there. There's a film adaptation, okay? And I'm actually going to share the link with you because it is available on YouTube. So you can check it out if you're interested, if you had read the novel, or if you just want to see, you know, if you're just curious about the look and all that. This was directed by Carl West. It's from 1996, and it's actually a mini-series. It's not really a feature film, but a mini-series. It's about 100 minutes long, so it's not really that long. Now, as a result of that, the fact that it's a mini-series, it kind of has the look of a telenovela, so we will say that, but it's really an elaborate telenovela. It's not just like a soap opera, like your normal soap opera. I really liked the mise en scène. Okay, the settings, the places were exactly the way that I had imagined them as I was reading the novel, and I have never been to Ecuador. Okay, and I don't think I've ever been to a place that has a similar setting as the one that we find in the novel, actually. It's a very difficult work to adapt. Okay, imagine adapting Pedro Páramo, adapting 100 Years of Solitude, which of course has been done, okay, but the difficulty stands right there. But I think they did a really good job. I mean, the structure and the pacing, they are really effective. The camera work is really good. The acting is pretty good too. The dialogue, for the most part, is just straight out of the novel, okay? So it's really a very, very good job in adaptation. Now, that said, when I watched the adaptation, that made it more obvious to me how masterful the novel itself is, okay? Because it's not really the what, it's the how, right? It's not the story itself. If you look at the story, you'll be like, hey, that was all that the novel was about. It's how the story is told. And here's a part when you realize that, yes, you know, the language, the whole way that the author plays with language, sometimes, you know, in a way that is reminiscent of Octavio Paz and his wordplay, that is lost, okay? That is obviously lost. That is something that happens all of the time. But in some cases, when it's the story, not so much the way that it is told, but the story itself, that is the central thing, you don't realize it. In this case, you do realize it. But there's another thing also. There's like one whole thread, and actually more than one now that I think about it. There are many narrative threads in this film that are just gone. And one of them is the one of Crisostomo Chalena, who is, to me, the bad guy, okay, the antagonist in this novel. They took that whole thing away. Juvencio Balda is missing also. Padre Gaudencio is missing. So they concentrated more on the story that goes around the colonel, okay? And by the way, you know, it's, you could say, Jorge, what do you mean? They took out the bad guy? This is a novel in which you could consider that maybe there are two bad guys, but there's one of them that is really bad and the other one, it's quite complex, okay? So if you take away the image, or, you know, the figure actually of Chalena, it doesn't do that much harm to the story, but you focus it, right? And here's the thing, because of that, the story focuses more on a story of passion than on a story of corruption in the adaptation. So you see, there are quite a few issues going on right here, but I still think if you take the film adaptation, the miniseries, for what it is, without comparing it too much, you know, to the novel, it's a very, very good work. Now, maybe we can hope that there's going to be another adaptation in this little book, which was put together, the edition by Carlos Abad, you know, the Cátedra edition. He says in the introduction, and this was published in 2004, that there was a group of Mexican filmmakers who had actually acquired the rights to make the film, and they were working on it. But I don't know, I mean, looking it up online, it seems that the project never came to fruition because I couldn't find anything on that. But these days, when we're getting adaptations of Pedro Páramo, 100 Years of Solitude, I think, you know, we can keep our fingers crossed and maybe hope to see if somebody dares to bring this to the screen once again. So let me show you something here. I have 3 books that I'm sure you know of. One of them is Pedro Páramo by Juan Rulfo. I also have here El Reino de este Mundo, The Kingdom of This World by Alejo Carpentier. And finally, a book that I will tell you about, hopefully very soon, Hombres de Maíz, or Men of Maize by Miguel Ángel Asturias. In Siete Lunas y Siete Serpientes, or Seven Serpents and Seven Moons, whatever you want to call it, you have a little bit of those 3 books that I have just shown you. So this is really a wonderful synthesis of that magical, marvelous, mythical, and real approach that we have to storytelling sometimes in Latin America. So Ecuadorian literature does not get a lot of attention to begin with, and this is really an outstanding novel. Let me tell you, if you want to find a copy of this one, especially if you want to find a copy in English, in translation, it's a little bit difficult, okay? Just a little bit. It's not impossible, but it's a little bit difficult to find one online. But I'm going to tell you, it's really worth it, okay? It's really worth it. If you do get the chance to read it, please do, because this is really a novel that I think more people need to explore, and I do hope that we are going to get some kind of a reissue soon. I think a reissue of this novel is actually overdue, so hopefully we'll see that. And just let me say once again, I just want to give a big thank you right here to my friend Kurt, because I had not even heard of this novel. I cannot believe it. That shows you how underrated Ecuadorian literature is. So thank you so much for recommending this to me. I absolutely loved it. It's been one of the best reads that I have experienced it in a very, very long time. So that's something that I'm truly thankful for. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Just let me know. Those were my 2 cents on Siete Lunas y Siete Serpientes by Demetrio Aguilera-Malta. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.